Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Don't you love the weather? Last week I was talking to you, the sun on my back, and it was glorious. But we have had the most horrendous downpours, and it's just flattened an awful lot of things. This rose, Munstead Wood, has been performing beautifully and the scent is incredible, but that rain has really battered things. So what I'm going to try and do here is just give it a little bit of support. So I'm going to wedge a cane just under that strong stem, and then I'm going to tie it in, and that will just help it through the next few weeks. This time of year is all about going out, deadheading, keeping an eye on things just to get the best out of your garden. It's that morning walk round with a cup of tea is when you see what's been going on overnight. Coming up on today's programme, Nick explores a vast collection of ferns at Kew Gardens to discover more about these mysterious Jurassic plants.
This extraordinary Angioteris is one of the plants that was clearly around during the time of the dinosaurs. You can just imagine Triceratops making its way through this mass of huge foliage.
Down in Brighton, we catch up with Kate Bradbury in her wildlife-friendly garden and discover her unique recipe for hanging baskets.
It's a bit of an experiment. I've got a bit of red clover in the middle, and then tucked into the sides here, I've got bird's foot trefoil, which I'm hoping will just drape down like big curtains.
And I will be making a window box with a little bit of a difference. So the first job I want to crack on with today is getting some height in the back of this border. But remember last week I was adding height to a sunny part of the garden. This is a lot more shady. When you talk to people about shade and planting in shade, it can be a little bit confusing. I'm going to classify this as partial shade. The sun comes up in the morning and it gets a decent little sort of dousing then, and it'll always be dappled. So through the day it's going to get little glimpses of sun. So the next thing is the soil. You might think because here, you know, big trees behind me and it's a reasonably shaded area that it's going to be dry. But no, it's not. It's at the bottom of a slope and the soil tends to hold the moisture pretty well throughout the year. But then when it comes to choosing plants, how do we get that little bit more out of our planting? So if you look what's in front of me, first of all, I've got a Runcus. Lovely flower now, but quite an interesting leaf shape. Come in front of me, Glenina. Interesting leaf shape, but look at the stem colour. And then if we come across, and this one is a bit of a mouthful, it's called Syringioma, but look at the leaf shape. But also, look at the stem colour. Different again. That, by the way, has got this beautiful yellow flower and it's sort of bell-shaped. Now if we move back to the Glenina, look at the flower shape. It's just different from the Syringioma. And then over there, the Aruncus is different again, it's feathery. And that, for me, is how you add extra details and interest to your garden. So the first plant I want to put in is this Phyllictrum, and it's called Flavum glaucum. And you can see that leaf shape is different. And flower-wise, it's really nice, soft yellow. So that will get to 1 metre, 1.5 metres, depending on the conditions of your garden. I'm going to leave the cane in this year with this plant because it is one of those plants that if I take that cane out, you can guarantee, especially with the variable weather, that it'll end up getting snapped. Next year it'll clump up and it'll be a really strong plant that might not even need support. Coming across to the next one. So this is Petrinia and it's called Punctiflora. It grows to about, again, 1.5 depending on conditions. Lovely yellow head. This will grow quite happy in deeper shade than I've got here. and the same soil conditions. So, there you go. Let's get that in there. Get this last one in. So the last one is called S54E16. Beautiful foliage plant. It's a smaller version in a lot of ways of the Aruncus, but that'll give me a nice repeated pattern through the back of the border. Height-wise, going to get up to a good 1.2 metres plus. Flower, lovely sort of white, but it's got a berry that follows on. I think the last thing with any herbaceous perennial is, how's it going to see the season out? Is it going to sort of die gracefully? Will it hold its form all the way through the winter months? And if it will, and you've got, you know, a smaller garden and you're trying to get that much more out of it, then ask that question. So let's get this last one in the ground. All I've got to do now is give those a really good watering in. That will settle the soil around the roots and they'll be away, and I can enjoy them for the rest of the year. Now we're going to find out a little bit more about a plant that is well and truly happy in shady conditions, and that's ferns. Nick has gone to Kew Gardens to look at their collection.
Brits have had a fascination with ferns ever since those early Victorian plant hunters started bringing them back from exotic climes. Now this, coupled with the fact that as a nation we started to embrace our own native ferns, led to fern fever. And they're just as prominent in our homes and gardens today. Ferns are an incredibly diverse group of plants from a wide range of environments, with an endless variety of leaf shapes and patterns. They add an understated elegance, whether used alone or to enhance other plants. There are over 10,000 species of ferns in existence across the world. This is the maidenhair fern. It makes a fabulous houseplant, and one of the reasons it gets that name is because it has these super fine, almost hair-like stems. And so if you look at the plant from a distance, almost appears as though the leaves are floating. Now, it comes from South America, which means it needs to stay at least +5, which means it's ideal as a houseplant, and it particularly likes to be in quite high humidity, so it would work well for a bathroom or the like, where it can be in indirect light. If you want to up the ante, then it might be worth considering growing its big brother. And here it is over here. This is Adiantum trapeziforme, and it is about 5 times the size. But what makes it truly special is the new leaves that have this beautiful sort of salmon quality to them as they emerge. Now, it likes similar conditions to its little brother, but you're going to need quite a big bathroom. This is Oceanopteris gibber. It's one of the very best tropical ferns. It comes from Fiji, and it's a relative baby compared to other tree ferns. It'll go up to about 1.5 meters high. Now, of course, coming from the tropics means that it needs an absolute minimum of 15 degrees. So it's ideal for a conservatory that you keep sort of high levels of moisture in. Now, in terms of keeping it happy, it wants to be in fairly dappled shade. It needs a quite acidic soil, and in terms of the compost that you use, something like a well-composted bark would work extremely well. And for me, the thing that makes it really special and really beautiful is these unfurling croziers having this beautiful sort of peach flesh tone to them. What a lovely exotic fern. Bringing newly discovered ferns back to the UK was a delicate and often frustrating task for early plant hunters who couldn't always ensure their survival. The invention of Dr. Ward's ingenious Wardian case was a breakthrough. This glazed box or mini glasshouse provided enough essential light and humidity for plants to survive many months on long journeys, and for ferns in particular, it protected them from the salt-laden winds they'd experience at sea. It also gave botanists clues. on how to cultivate fern species and enable them to flourish in giant glasshouses like this one. So, Alice, we're surrounded by these fabulous ferns, such range and diversity. They're one of the most ancient plants, aren't they?
Yeah, so ferns evolved about 400 million years ago, so well before flowering plants.
So they were around at the time of the dinosaurs?
They were around in the time of dinosaurs in some different forms, yeah.
Amazing. And just looking at the range here, they do have certain commonalities, don't they? Because, of course, they don't produce a seed.
No, so they reproduce from spores on their sori on the underside of the fronds, and the spores come out of there.
I mean, this patination is beautiful, but this is literally it getting ready to propagate itself.
Yeah.
The spores are being produced in these little bodies on the back of the leaf, and they basically float out into the atmosphere. They need to then land in a pretty moist environment, and then they go through the most extraordinary and complex life cycle in order to produce a brand new little baby fern. When it comes to propagating either hardy ferns or the tropical ferns that we grow as houseplants, there's a lot more straightforward techniques that you can use.
Some ferns, like woodwardias, will make a bulbil on the underside of the frond, which sort of weighs down the tip of the plant, and then they'll then root out and sort of make another plant, and then they sort of travel around.
Sort of leapfrog along. So it's almost like stolons in a strawberry,
yes,
that it can sort of, you know, make its way across the landscape.
Yes.
If you think about some of our hardy ferns, things like the shuttlecock fern, that's very simple to deal with in spring. It's just a case of digging up a complete plantlet and moving it elsewhere in the garden. It would be very easy to assume that ferns all come from cool, damp forest situations, but of course their distribution is global. And this, down here, comes from tropical Africa. Now, it's called Pteris dentata, and the reason for its name refers to these particularly dentate or marked leaves, which have got that lovely tooth-like quality to them. Now, for me, what makes it special as a fern is it has this very, very light, limey colour to it, which is a beautiful contrast to other ferns. And an added bonus is it keeps producing leaves all the way through the year, so it's got that lovely freshness. Now, in terms of growing it at home, it's a tropical fern, so it needs to stay +10. You could very happily grow in a cool conservatory. Like most of the ferns, if you mist it once a day, you'll keep it very happy. This extraordinary Angioteris is one of the plants that was clearly around during the time of the dinosaurs. You can just imagine Triceratops making its way through this mass of huge foliage. Now, it's a plant that comes from Madagascar, but it's also spread across through to the South Pacific Islands. And there are two things that make it truly extraordinary. First of all, these fronds, these leaves, will go up to 8 metres long, so it's truly, truly vast. And secondly, it has the most extraordinary spore distribution technique. The spores actually explode off the back of the leaves. The other thing that I love about this plant is the base of it. Look at these, they literally look like dinosaur feet. Ferns are adapted to such a wide range of environments that there's sure to be one which will thrive in your home.
I think what blows my mind about ferns is to think that some of those plants were around when dinosaurs were walking the earth. And I think Nick's right. You'll find one that suits a lovely little shady spot in your garden. What I'm doing here is dealing with what the wind and the rain has done, clearing things up. But I'm just mulching as I go through, and I'm using composted bark. putting about 40, 50 mil on them, which is just shy of a couple of inches. Because this polystickman, though it's quite happy in slightly drier conditions, the soil here is not great. So not only will I help keep the weeds down, keep the moisture in, but I'll improve the soil over a period of time. And it's a great time to do it because the ground is wet after a lot of rain. I know that I'm going to actually contain that moisture in the soil. And now we're off to visit the first of your gardens, and we're going to meet a viewer that does not let anything in her garden go to waste.
Hello, my name is Aruna and this is my garden in South London, Dulwich. One of the best things about it is this huge oak tree, which is actually not in my garden. It gives me masses of shelter and privacy. There's loads of wildlife in it and I love it. The leaves collect behind my shed and produce an inexhaustible supply of leaf mould. I can use it sieved to make compost, and I can use it also unsieved just as a mulch around my plants. I garden on very heavy clay, so I need a soil conditioner such as this to break up the soil and improve the structure. And this is the lovely leaf mould that I'm left with. My children are grown up now, so they no longer need the swings. So I decided to plant a raised bed beneath the swings and use the structure as a support for canes. This is my front garden, and here I grow chives, different varieties of thyme, Swiss chard, oregano, marjoram, and different varieties of sage, and not forgetting the rosemary. When you pick or rub the plants together, it releases the oils, and the smell is absolutely sensational. During the lockdown, I put a sign up on the fence inviting people to come in and take their own herbs for free. I really hope you liked some of the ideas in my video. Goodbye.
Aruna, you look like you are creating some cracking stuff. And I would say to anybody, if you've got the room, then actually creating leaf mould is fantastic. I call it garden gold. And talking about leaf mould and growing medium in general, you might have read or heard in the press over the last 4 to 6 weeks that the government are going to phase out the use of peat. So if you're used to gardening with peat and you've been doing it for years on end, this is now a different material that you'll be working with in the long term. But as a gardener, can you garden without peat? Yes, hand on heart, I think you can. I've been doing it for a long, long time. I've had some disasters and I've had some real successes, but I've got myself to a place where I can happily garden without peat. And I thought it would be interesting just to get my hands on a few bags of different peat-free multi-purpose composts and see what they were like. And even I was slightly blown away by the difference in them. I put my hands in these. Straight away you can see that these mixes are made from different materials. Here I can see that there's wood fibre in there. There's even some soil. I move in here, you can see there's a bit of horticultural sand, composted bark. And then here I can see the coir in it straight away, composted bark, but also the texture of them is changing. I go across to the end here and this is a lot coarser and there's grit in it. But they are all multi-purpose composts, which means that you and me will go into the garden centre and we'll pick up a bag and we'll think that it's going to do every single job. And in reality, it doesn't always. So if you think about seeds to start with, well, I'd be looking probably for a finer compost. So actually, if I was going to choose, I'd probably go to this one. It's quite fine and I probably wouldn't have to sieve it. But then if I went across and this is what I had, well, that's fine. I'd just sieve it through and I'd make myself a fine seed bed. So for me, I use it as the base. That's my starting point. That's the main medium that I use. And then I think about it a bit like baking a cake. I can't bake a cake just with flour, so I have to add other ingredients, and I've got my cupboard full of ingredients, and depending on, you know, the sponge or the chocolate brownie or whatever it is that I want to make, yeah, I do bake a little bit, I'll add to it. So I've got some horticultural sand and then horticultural grit. They all do slightly different things. Perlite, which is basically a volcanic rock, and then I've got topsoil. Most of it I get in a bag, and also composted bark. So that's my ingredients that I start to add to my peat-free mixes. So first thing, we're in the garden, we want to pot something on and we want to keep it there longer term. First thing I'm going to do is just take a random peat-free mix, and we've got 1 pot of that. And think about the hosta. What does it love? Probably a decent amount of moisture around its roots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, at the moment, about half a pot of topsoil and then see what that's like. I think, yeah, that's not too bad at all. Now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of composted bark. And I think, well, that'll actually help with the moisture retention. And also I can already feel that, you know, it'll hold the moisture really, really well. All I am going to do is just do another half a pot, I hope you're writing this down, of peat-free compost. Let's get that in. So now look, got a nice mix ready to go. So now let's take our pot, a little bit of mix in the bottom there, and I'm making sure the pot's not too big. And then I'm just going to fill in around the sides. But you can see, I'm thinking about the plant, I'm thinking about the conditions that it might want to be in the long term. So that's potting up. Another thing we do this time of year is taking cuttings. For cuttings, in reality, I want to keep it nice and open. So I might possibly go to gravel, but I don't now. I tend to use perlite. We use about 60-40, so about 40% of the perlite. And that might sound like a lot, but I'm going to keep this nice and open. And to test it, once I've done, squeeze and then falls open. I know now that will be nice and open and the roots will get going quickly. So there you go. That's just a couple of jobs that you might do in the garden and how I would use peat-free to do it. And it is just my take. What I do know is over the last 30 years, using peat-free hasn't really affected what I get from my garden. And now we're going to catch up with wildlife gardener Kate Bradbury in her own garden, showing us exactly what we can do at this time of year to encourage wildlife.
When our gardens start buzzing, it's so satisfying, knowing we're providing good food and homes for insects. But when I built my pond, my dream was for newts, toads and frogs. Frogs are the next layer up in the food chain and definitely a gardener's friend. They breed in ponds and will sniff out a new one to see if it suits. And guess what? The frogs found my pond for the first time this spring and laid masses and masses of frog spawn. And now my pond is full of tadpoles. Eggs and tadpoles make great food for other species, so only about 1 in 50 grows into a froglet. And when the froglets emerge from the pond in midsummer, they need damp, dark habitat to shelter from predators, which is why I've made them this log pile, which is less than 2 metres away from the pond. But then when they're in the garden, they in turn eat loads of pests and other beasties, like small slugs and snails, flying insects and beetles. So it's a win-win situation for the frogs and the gardeners. I fringed the end of the pond with plants like cranesbill to give the froglets cover as they clamber out. But I'm hoping this water forget-me-not and brook lime will also attract new visitors. The reason they're here is because newts use them to lay their eggs. Unlike frogs and toads, newts lay eggs individually and they fold them into the leaves of plants like brook lime and water forget-me-not. So I've planted in the hope that I can attract newts to come to the garden. They're not here yet, but just like the frogs, if you build it, they'll come. And when they do come, I'll know they're here because the leaves of these plants will be folded over, each one of them containing a little newt egg. As most amphibians walk into your garden, the more gaps under gates or holes in walls you can give them, the happier they'll be. In a little garden, providing homes and food all year can be a challenge, but there are tricks. This pulmonaria has been feeding bees in the spring, but now it's gone over and by cutting it back, I can fit in new pollinating plants. So this is poached eggplant. It's an annual with white and yellow flowers, absolutely beloved of solitary bees. I'm going to plant a few just around the pulmonaria here. It's going to fluff up, it's going to flower, it's going to provide loads of nectar and pollen. And then when the pulmonaria needs the space back, these will have gone over and I can just whip them out. I grow loads of these. They're really easy to grow from seed. They're so useful for bees and I can just dot them around whenever there's a space that needs filling. They'll definitely go here too once I've chopped back this leggy cerinthe or honeywort. And since I built my garden, it's also inspired neighbours to plant up theirs, so there's even more colour nearby. It's really heartening to see all these brilliant bee-friendly flowers in action. As well as making more space for plants, there are ways to provide even more flowers. And this year I'm on a new mission. This is a hanging basket with a twist, because I've made it specifically for wildlife. It's a bit of an experiment. I've got a bit of red clover in the middle, and then draped around the edges I've got more poached eggplant, and then tucked into the sides here I've got bird's foot trefoil, which I'm hoping will just drape down like big curtains. This is just coming into flower now. The poached eggplant here has got loads of buds on it, and it'll probably be in flower for between 4 and 6 weeks. But for the bees that come after, I'm planting up a second hanger basket with smaller plants, which will carry the season through and provide bees with a really good source of pollen and nectar until late summer. Bird's foot trefoil is a really good all-rounder, loved by bees and the caterpillars of the common blue butterfly. This is red clover, which is a fantastic bee plant. And the flowers are composite flowers and they have long corollas or flower tubes. So they're perfect for long-tongued bumblebees. So the really big fat bumblebees you see going into foxgloves, those are called garden bumblebees and they've got really long tongues. And then the little gingery ones are called common carders. They're the ones that will visit the red clover, hopefully in my hanging basket. And I've put it here because I'm a bit of a bee geek and it's right next to my bee hotels. And not only do I want to look at the bees, visiting the flowers and going straight to the bee hotel, but I'm hoping it might attract new species too. First though, I'll have a well-deserved sit down. The most important thing I've learned since creating this wildlife garden is that you have to take time to sit and enjoy it. Because that's how I get to learn so much more about the wildlife that's already here, as well as see the new species when they arrive.
Kate, I totally agree with you. And I promise I do actually sit down occasionally and enjoy the garden. But I've been thinking, if I had to pick one favourite thing about creating this garden, it's got to be the wildlife that comes in and enjoys this space with me. And this is a bee hotel, and it's actually Mark II. I put one up last year, which is just along there. And I put so much research into the mason bee and the size of the hole that you needed, and I needed to sand it out and make sure it was clean and it pointed the right direction. Put it up, and then with 2 weeks, a leafcutter bee had moved in. And I'm hoping that this gets occupied very soon. I think us as gardeners, we know how important the spaces that we create are for wildlife, but so do young people. Also, so do BBC Radio 2, because they're running a competition called the Big Bee Challenge, and it's for young people from 6 years old to 12 to design a garden that will encourage and provide for bees. And the winner will have their garden built at an NHS unit for young people. But you haven't got long. The competition closes on Monday, the 5th of July at 6 p.m. Have a look on our website, all the information is on there. But please, please, get stuck in, have a go. You never know, you might win it. Now, still to come on today's programme. We visit the Isle of Man, where its unique climate makes it a paradise for gardeners.
We have the Gulf Stream running past us, so we don't get the cold temperatures that you would associate with other parts of the UK. I think people are extremely surprised by what we're growing here.
And for those that want to squeeze a little bit more from their space, I'll be building a window box. But first, we meet a viewer that has transformed her backyard using pots.
Hello everybody, my name's Julia and I live in Barton under Needwood in Staffordshire. Today I thought I'd show you some of the things I've been doing in my backyard. So up until a few months ago, my backyard was really just all brick and pavers. But what I really want to do is create this almost little Mediterranean pot garden. This is my herb area, which is underneath my kitchen window. I'm not so great with watering my hanging baskets, so I've done grass hanging baskets this year, which are actually looking really good. I've also found a massive love for hostas. I've always liked hostas, and I had about 5 or 6 in the back garden that were getting rather big. So all these ones this year, you can see, have been divided off 6 plants. That was an old Christmas tree that was bought to go in my office last year, and I've salvaged it and it's doing really, really well. This is my little sanctuary at the moment where I can just come of a morning or an evening and have a cup of tea. It's been really good as well because it's taught me how I can make use of plants that are getting rather squashed and crushed under bigger plants within my garden. So this space that before was really not very interesting is now a real lovely cosy haven.
Julia, I thought your hostas looked absolutely fantastic. They're a lot better than mine. Mine have been absolutely mullered by the slugs and the snails. Now, not a lot of people know this, but during the winter months, I actually enjoy locking myself in the shed and carving, making things out of timber and stone. So this year, I came up with an idea for some window boxes. So I'm going to show you something. This might be a little bit awkward because obviously he's not going to move. So there we go. It's a box that's got a series of sections in it. You could put a pot in there quite simply, or what I'm going to do is plant each space, and then when something goes over, you can actually tease it out without disturbing everything else. He's definitely not going to move. So I don't know quite how we're going to do it. Come on, little fella. Right, down there. Good boy. So, you're going to need a front and you're going to need a back. The Timber that I've used is oak, but you could do this with softwood, paint it and detail it as you want. Thickness wise, I've gone for 2 centimetres thick. And then the depth of my timber is actually 20 centimetres, and that depth is great for the planting, but also to put a pot in as well. And then the length of this is actually 113 centimetres long. So each compartment is 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres. And that allows me to put my ends inside my timber. It's going to be a lot better for the timber and actually visually just looks better. And then my dividers are actually obviously 20 centimetres from front to back, but they're only 17 centimetres high. So you can probably just see there, I've just set them down very slightly so that when the box is planted, it still looks like one complete box. So fix at each end just to hold everything in place. Once you've got the sides, the back and the base in place, the whole thing holds together really well. So once I've got my back and my base and my sides on, I can then offer up the front. So for me, the brass screws on the front, just give it a lovely bit of detail. Right, so the divides are going in. So ultimately, the divides have got 4 fixings, 2 front and 2 back. So there you go. That's the last one, and it's solid. The last little detail, which is slightly indulgent, is the carving. Just to create a bit more interest all the way along. I honestly do get the same thing from this that I get from gardening. There you go. All I need to do now is drill a hole in each compartment just for drainage. But while I'm doing that, we've got another chance to catch up with Roger Butler from Kent, who does love a hydrangea.
Well, I started growing plants when I was 8. My aunt grew chrysanthemums and dahlias, and I quite liked them, and I started growing them myself. And since then, I've moved on to growing trees and then shrubs, and hydrangeas has become a bit of a speciality. The interest in them commercially sort of exploded about 8–10 years ago, and for 5 years we've been expanding our range and growing more and more different types, and I think we've picked a winner. They're not Granny's plants anymore. They give such a wide range of colour. You know, they start flowering naturally in the spring, and you've got colour right the way through till the autumn. The bunch of hydrangeas that I've just cut feature some mop heads, which is this type of hydrangea, and 2 lace caps and 1 double-flowered variety. This one here is a mature flower of a variety called Berlin. The next one here is Glam Rock, which was the plant of the year a few years ago. In America, they call it pistachio, which I think is quite appropriate. I've got a small petalled variety, which is Aisha, again a mop head. This is Rottelkirschen, a German variety, lace cap, very nice, reliable, quite easy grower. In England, lace caps sell better than mop heads, and on the continent they struggle to sell the lace caps and everyone wants a mop head, but I like them all. I'm sorry, you're going to struggle to pin me down to one variety. Well, the unusual thing is that the soil decides the colour of the plant, and these two plants here are the same variety, they're Magical Revolution, and the only difference between these two plants is the compost that they're grown in. This pink plant has been grown in an alkaline soil, whereas the blue one is grown in an acid soil with added aluminium sulfate. And of course, if you grow it in a container, it's easy to control the soil pH. And if you plant them in your garden, it's pretty much pot luck as to what colour they'll be in the coming years. They'll probably say blue or pink for the first year, but as the soil affects them, they'll go to whatever the soil type allows. Your best bet, if you want a hydrangea that stays the same colour, is to plant a white one, because the acidity or alkalinity of the soil doesn't affect the colour. The word hydrangea comes from Greek, and it comes from two words, one of them for water and the other one for vessel or container. So it's giving you a clue they need quite a lot of water. If you want to grow the very best plants, they need to be in slight shade, in a very organic compost, and they are quite hungry, they need quite a lot of feed. Paniculatas are fine in full sun. They'll grow virtually on most soils. Some of them grow to 10, 12 feet. I love my plants, and I grow a lot of plants. My wife sometimes says to me that I won't sell some of the plants on the nursery because I like them so much, and she's right. She's absolutely right.
Roger, I agree with you. They're not a granny's plant anymore. I'm partly saying that because I absolutely love them and I can't stop buying them. So, we're in the box. I've gone back to the box that I made earlier. This has been oiled so it will last that bit longer. I'm going to plant this up with a series of herbs. The first thing I'm going to do is just put some horticultural grit in the bottom of each. What you don't want is the water sitting at the bottom, partly for the wood, but also the roots on your plant. And then I've done a really sort of good gritty mix. So most of these herbs like well-drained conditions. There's probably about 40% grit and the rest is a peat-free compost. And the first thing I'm going to put in is the sage. Obviously, because I've got the compartments, I'm always going to contain the roots, which means it'll contain the size of the plants. But they'll last quite a long time in here. And when I feel they're starting to get really contained within this confined area, what I will do is I'll start feeding it. So I will liquid feed this probably twice a year. The next one I'm going to put in is the marjoram. And I know they're just simple little herb mix, but what I'm trying to do is just bury those foliage again. And the next one's rosemary. And this will be a plant that you'll read the label and think it's too big for this space, but it won't be. You can start to see the whole thing coming together. And now this is just a thyme, it's called Silver Posy. But you could grow all sorts in here. And the lovely thing with this is that you can chop and change. You know, I could tease that out, put something else in. If that got too big, don't need to disturb these. Whereas actually in one box, they would all start to mat together. Now, I'm going to put some parsley in. The parsley doesn't need it so well drained. And I think that's the last little trick, is that you can control the compost type, your mix types, in every single container. So here, I've used a mix that's got composted bark in it and less gravel. And there you go, that's the last little one going in there. So what's lovely, it just keeps all the compost in place, but really sets the plants off. There you go. I hope that's given you a few ideas. I have just the spot for it, and I'm going to get someone to help me move it there, and I'm not going to water it until it's finally in place, because it will at that point be a little bit heavy. Now we're off to the Isle of Man to see a rather beautiful garden.
I'm Adam Quayle, and we're at the Milntown Estate on the Isle of Man. I've been garden manager for the last 4 years, and I absolutely love working here. The grounds have undergone a considerable transformation. The walled garden was actually originally an orchard. All there was the large camellias and rhododendrons which were around the perimeter. Everything inside has been planned and planted in the last 8 years. The microclimate on the Isle of Man has influenced what we are growing here, and being so far north, you wouldn't associate that. We have the Gulf Stream running past us, so we don't get the cold temperatures that you would associate with other parts of the UK. We have Dodonia viscosa purpurea with its lovely lush purple foliage. We have Echium pineanas with their beautiful tall flower spikes that are just laden with bees. We can grow Aeonium arboreum. Their hardiness zone is H1C, which you would only be putting them out in the summer months in other parts of the UK, but we overwinter them outside. So here we have some Aeonium arboreum cuttings. It's a semi-succulent, and we will take all the bottom growth from them, and then that would be our cutting ready. What I'll do though is set these aside for a day to let the actual cut heal over to stop infection. Now, what I would do is some horticultural grit compost mix, make a hole, just a few cuttings in each. Now, you'll leave this, you'll give it a good water after, and then you'll leave it for 6 weeks, and this will have rooted. And what you're left with is a nice, healthy Aeonium plant. You see all the foliage just come back on the bottoms. I think people are extremely surprised by what we're growing here. They usually ask a lot of questions on how we can grow it and what special things we do. Do we fleece the stuff over the winter? Do we wrap them? Do we bring them in? And fortunately, we don't need to. So here we are in the jungle walk, this being one of my favourite areas in the garden. It's an architectural element that we've added to this area. We've planted Dicksonia antarctica with its bare stems and its beautiful lime green foliage. And then we've underplanted the entire area with dominating leaf forms such as Astelia silver shadow. We've got Libertia and various forms of pulmonaria. Another unusual tender plant that we have is Geranium ruteri. It was Geranium canariense due to the fact that it comes from the Canaries, and that grows prolifically on the Isle of Man, but particularly in these gardens. So here we have the Fuchsia magellanica, considered to be the Manx fuchsia, just because it's naturalised so well. It was brought over in about 1850, and then it's just spread from there into the woodlands, the hedgerows. It's done so well on the island because we do not have the cold winters, so they will just keep going and going and going. And we have some 12 to 15 feet specimens. Say you've got a large fuchsia in your back garden and you're unsure what to do with it. You can elevate the whole lot and you'll be able to underplant then. So if you want to plant shade-loving plants, then you can do so, and it's making an area more accessible. So what I'll be doing is pruning off all the lower growth and lifting the canopy. And you continue that up until you're happy with the elevation on the plant. I particularly like the fact that you can see the stems. It gives you an architectural element. My ambitions for Milntown is that we create this place of beauty, to put something in place that, you know, future generations can come to appreciate. Wow, they're foxes. Are we going to do some weeding? I have 3 small children. My young girl, Evie, she's only 2.5, and she comes out and she helps me weed, and she loves getting her hands dirty.
Dig. No, dig.
Oh, you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dig.
When I first started Milntown, it was a job. Then it became my passion, then my hobby, and then I moved. I got a cottage on site, and then it became the place that I live. It's amazing. I wouldn't live anywhere else, or work anywhere else.
Now that is a garden that I need to pay a visit to. But aren't we lucky in the UK to have that huge variation in conditions which allows us to grow so many varieties of plants? Last year I took a bit of a gamble and planted some ginger in the garden, mulched it and crossed my fingers. And I thought because of the winter we'd had, I'd lost it. And one morning I came out with a cup of tea and I saw it. And this ginger was coming out and I gave it a little jump. So what I've got is I've got 1, 2, 3 clumps and I've got some more over there. So I'll add this one just to keep that rhythm going. So I think that's going to work really well in there, that contrast between those 2 foliages. And again, if you didn't want to plant something like this in your garden, it works well in a pot for a bit of late colour. And I'd love to tell you the variety of my gingers, but I lost the labels. If you want to do something like this and put it in the garden, just check out how hardy it is, because some are a lot hardier than others. So there you go. I'll just give that a really good watering in, but you can see as that grows and fills this space, the contrast between those 2 leaves is going to be fantastic. And even looking back towards you with a little quaking grass, that is a combination I think is going to work really well. And now we're off to Epsom in Surrey for the last of your gardens. And we're going to meet a viewer that has grown one of my favourite climbers.
Hi, I'm Jane and this is my garden. I'd like to show you my wisteria. It's a white wisteria, probably a floribunda, and it starts here and it goes all the way around the house and half the garden. I planted it 27 years ago and it's very special to our family because it first flowered 5 years later on the birth of my youngest daughter, and it's flowered every year ever since in May and June. This is the sheer weight of the white wall, full of bees buzzing around. There must be about 100 bees or so in there at the moment. And then I've managed to extend it along the back of the house and down the fence, and I don't know where it's going to stop yet. The smell is absolutely amazing. The perfume is wonderful. And this is my favourite place to sit for a cup of tea, because you can see up into the wisteria and then you can see through to the white wall and the rest of the garden. It's so magical to be in this tunnel. Thank you for watching and I hope you've enjoyed it, and goodbye.
Jane, you seem to be getting as much joy from your wisteria as I do mine. But I would say yours really is a cracker. Mine's gone over now, but as that goes, something else arrives. And for me at the moment, it's this little collection in front of me. You've got the Astrantia, lovely sort of white, paper-like flower with a pink flush, grasses coming up through it. But my favourite bit is the way that the seed heads of the geum are sat amongst the Astrantia. The only problem is this pulling me because of its beauty means that this rheum at the back here has caught my eye. Needs a little bit of work. You could say I've been sharing that with slugs and snails. But if you look closely in there, you can see there's new growth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that back, give it a mulching around, and it'll come good later on in the season. But while I'm doing that, here's something you could be doing at the weekend. Hardy geraniums like Geranium phaeum can look a little bit untidy after they've finished flowering, like this one that has flopped over the path. But if you chop them hard back right down to the ground, they'll put on a new flush of growth in a matter of weeks. It's not too late to get some kale going for winter. I like to start mine off in a tray of compost, which I water beforehand. Sprinkle the seed over the top and lightly cover with a fine layer of compost. Germination will only take a few days, and there's no need to provide any heat. To spruce up your garden and help prevent grass from invading your borders, it's worth giving the lawn edges a regular trim. I use a pair of long-handled shears for the job, but garden shears would work just as well. Is there anything that says summertime more than strawberries and cream? I think not. But also something else that says summertime to me are the flower shows. And you'll be pleased to know that the RHS Hampton Court Palace Garden Festival is back. And the coverage starts next Wednesday. And I, for one, am chuffed to pieces because it will be lovely for me to catch up with some old friends. So hopefully I'll see you there. That is about it from us. I hope you've enjoyed the last couple of weeks because I have really loved sharing the garden with you. Monty will be back next week at 9 o'clock. In the meantime, look after yourselves.